Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm Bennett Richardson, Protocols General Manager, and I'm excited to welcome you to the Inside View with Databricks CEO Ali Ghodsi. We launched Protocol Enterprise earlier this year to help professionals like you navigate the people, power, and politics of enterprise technology. Today's conversation is the latest in a series of interviews we're hosting to bring you an inside view into the most dynamic companies and leaders in cloud and enterprise. Databricks has emerged as a frontrunner in the booming cloud enterprise database market. Already worth $28 billion as a private company, it's expected to be one of the year's biggest IPOs. Investors and customers alike believe Databricks is well positioned to compete against rival Snowflake, as well as the cloud hyperscalers like AWS and Google that offer similar products. Protocol's senior enterprise reporter Joe Williams is going to be speaking with Ali today to learn what's next for the company and how Databricks plans to win in an increasingly competitive market. Before I hand it over to Joe, two quick notes. Don't forget to subscribe to Protocol Enterprise at protocol.com/enterprise. And keep an eye out next week for Protocol's manual on databases. The database market is exploding with sky-high valuations for vendors and customers rushing to think differently about data. Next week's manual is the Protocol Enterprise Guide to the fast-changing field. Now for the main event. Over to you, Joe, to start the conversation with Ali.
Excellent. Thanks, Bennett. And Ali, thanks for joining me early on a Monday morning. Excited to chat.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So I think, out of the way, let's, the question you get asked, I would assume almost every hour of every day. IPO timing, any update, anything we can expect?
I've said it, IPO ready this year, and then the exact timing is, TBD. It's not something we obsess over. I think it's just going to be one step in a long journey over many years to come. So, it doesn't really matter if we IPO a little bit earlier, or a little bit later. I think this is going to be a very successful company over decades to come.
And are you thinking still, there's been a lot of discussion about, how startups go public. Are you still thinking the traditional process, or are there other considerations?
Well, all options are on the table for us. We study, other companies that are going public, how it's going for them. So we keep an eye on it. Just like everybody else, there's not that many, N is small, or there's not that many samples of companies that went, direct listing. So, we'll see.
Mm. Obviously the Snowflake had a huge IPO. You're seeing monster funding rounds for your company and others. Why is there so much attention on this industry right now?
I think it's the fact that, in our case, people realize that data and AI can just have such a huge impact on these companies, right? If you look at Google, it's not really a search engine. It's really how they leveraged AI and data in a really strategic way, and they disrupted the whole industry with it. Same thing with Twitter, same thing with Facebook, same thing with Airbnb, same thing with Uber, right? And, everybody realizes what potential it has. So they want to quickly get there because, they want to disrupt, or they're going to get disrupted. So I think that's what's going on. So this data revolution, and especially a tip of the spear is sort of the AI and machine learning. It's top of mind for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And I know we'll probably touch more on the competition that you have with Snowflake, but as somebody who is eyeing a public offering, what did Snowflake's IPO in December and just the massive success that it had, what did it show for you, or what confidence did it give you potentially in your own business?
I think what it showed is that investors and analysts now starting to realize that there might be these new companies that emerge, which will be extremely successful. They'll be multi-cloud, and they'll sort of have maybe similar growth rates as the cloud vendors had. Before that, it was sort of, there are these 3 or 4 cloud vendors, and they're going to be massive, and they're going to have massive growth rates. Now people are kind of waking up to there might be a layer above the cloud. Let's call it, the sky. And they're going to be really, really huge. And, and the growth rates are insane. So maybe there's a whole new economy emerging on top of the cloud.
Mm-hmm. I've never heard somebody use the term sky before. So I like that. I might steal it. And to go very basic, you at Databricks, you've taken the approach of the data lakehouse. For those who don't follow this space maybe very regularly, what is that? And why do you view it as so critical for the future of AI development?
Yeah. So look, data warehouses existed for a long time. They're amazing, right? They actually revolutionized what businesses could do in the last 40 years. With data warehouses, now organizations could actually plug in these BI tools, business intelligence tools, and they could ask questions about the past. What was my revenue last week, last month, and so on. But they couldn't ask any questions about the future. What's my revenue going to be next quarter? which of my customers is going to churn next sort of month. Couldn't do that. For that, you need a separate stack. That separate stack is called data lakes. You plug in, AI on top of it, and now you can ask questions about the future. But unfortunately, with the data lakes, you can't ask any questions about the past. So you had to kind of pick between these two, and many enterprises try to do both, and it's ends up being very complicated and costly. So the Lakehouse is a technological breakthrough that enables you to do both in one place. So all your data in one place on a data lake, and have BI to ask questions about the past and AI to ask questions about the future. So it sort of revolutionizes what organizations are doing with data and AI. It's very similar to kind of what Google and Facebook and Twitter and these companies were doing with their data internally. We're just bringing it to all the other enterprises out there.
Mm-hmm. And, if I'm a business, I probably have some legacy system, some blend of services from a hyperscalers that include some of, the products that do something similar to what you just talked about. And now I'm also weighing options from, a plethora of new vendors like yourself and others. So how are enterprises thinking about this? What should their strategy be? And how do you think it needs to be different than how it was in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think number one, they're now seeing that, okay, I could go with the cloud scalers. But which one should I pick? Which cloud is the best one for me? And that seems to be changing. The only game in town was AWS initially. Then Azure came along and it's doing really, really great. And then now we have Google, and then there's Alibaba. So which one should I pick? And what if I pick the wrong one, right? So more and more they're thinking, wow, and we're paying quite a bit. It would be good to have some optionality and not just lock ourselves into one. So multi-cloud is becoming a thing. And I think that's why you're seeing these, what I call, the sky computing vendors like us and Snowflake and Okta and, Mongo come along, the layer on top that gives them the optionality, and they don't have to get locked in. So that's one really important thing. The second thing is they don't want to get locked in. They don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. So they want to choose something that's open. Why? Because, in the past, there were great companies like Oracle and others that sold them amazing tech, but it wasn't open, so they got locked in. And over years, that company did not need to innovate anymore. And now they couldn't get off of it because they're locked in. So openness is another thing that a lot of enterprises care about. And if you look again at the FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Google, they all base their stuff on open source technology. So that's a second really important consideration. So they want something that's open so that they, again, have flexibility. And then third, they want the AI and the machine learning. That's important for them because that's how the big guys did it. They want to be able to do the same thing. So I think those three are really, really critical and top of mind for most CIOs and sort of enterprise architects and people that are making the decision around what would the data future for them look like.
Yeah, and when I talk to a lot of companies about this and their efforts to become data-driven, a lot of them won't cite the technology as a hurdle, but rather, getting the talent pool needed to actually support that. How, as a CEO, do you have to think about that in developing your own platform to maybe help address some of those challenges, or make it easier for companies to maybe not pursue the same, quantity or level of talent as they might have needed in the past to be able to support some of these like AI ML algorithms?
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, that's, when we started the business, we would ask people, what technology should I build for you? And they would say, can you help me hire people? I said, well, we're not recruiters, and so that's what I really need. I need you to help me hire people. So very early on, we realized that this is going to be a big bottleneck for enterprises, right? They don't have the 30,000 engineers that Google had with PhDs and whatnot. So how do we help them? And what we came up with is, one, open source is really important because these open source technologies, they create these big communities. These communities, they can help you. You can go online, you can ask questions, they can solve the problem for you. There are books, there are courses, which wouldn't have been possible if we were just one company doing private proprietary code. So that's one way you can help them sort of democratize and get access to information and, recruit people from those communities. So that's really, really important. The second thing that's important is that your platform can actually support the different people in an organization. Turns out there are different personas that all need to use data. So early on, we called it unified analytics. We wanted to enable different people in the organization to be able to use Databricks. So we built different facets. There's one facet that targets data scientists. They might know statistics, but not everybody knows that. So we also have a facet which is for analysts. They might not know any machine learning or statistics. They're just analysts. They want to look at some, graphs and dashboards. And then we built a facet for data engineers. And the data engineers, they're much more, advanced software engineers. So the product literally has different ways you can enter it and access it so that it can be more usable within these enterprises. So that not everybody has to be that sort of, Stanford PhD to use it. And then we focused a lot on secure sharing to make sure that you can share whatever you produced with the rest of the organization, people who are not any of those categories that I mentioned. So sharing becomes extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on the openness piece, that is something you mentioned a lot this call. We've talked about a lot, and it's obviously reflected in some of your recent announcements. Why is this so important to you? And maybe touch on the data sharing announcement you just made that I think you've described as a game changer for the industry and something that you think is really going to take Databricks' own platform to the next level.
Yeah, openness is important because in multiple ways. As I mentioned earlier, it helps the enterprises not get locked into us, and that's good for them. That lets them have optionality and alternatives in the future. But it's also good for us because it keeps us on our toes. We can't rely on lock-in to succeed. That forces us to constantly innovate. So we have to create an innovation factory that continues innovating, and that'll just make us better as a company. So that's the second reason that we do this. And the third is there's, of course, the community, the groundswell that you get with these open source projects. It's, we're in a B2B space, but the open source technologies we developed, they have the kind of traction that almost B2C technologies have, like the Facebooks of the world, right? These networks. You get suddenly 1 million developers worldwide downloading your technology, talking about it, doing meetups, get excited, put it on their CVs, write books about it, teach about it, extend it, contribute to it. So we want to be able to get that. So that's why openness is important. But the recent announcement, the reason I think that is, moving this to the next level is that in the last 20, 30 years, one thing that all enterprises that were in this data space realized was that the data that they have is important. If they could enable sharing it with others, then they could unlock the value for other people. That way you can democratize data within an organization. So, almost 30 years ago, they started building in data sharing capabilities into the data warehouses. And pretty much every data warehouse vendor today enables data sharing. The problem with it, though, is everybody has to buy the same vendor for that to work. So if one person buys Oracle, everybody else has to buy Oracle as well. Then you can share these data sets between the different participants. If they don't buy Oracle, if they buy some other technology, then the sharing does not work. And what's happened over the last 20, 30 years is that people end up buying lots of different systems. People didn't standardize on just one system. That never, ever happened. And when you talk to a big enterprise, they say, oh, we got one flavor of each. We have so many of them and we can't get them to talk to each other. It's a mess. Help me. And that was not possible until this announcement that we made last week. It's called Delta Sharing. It's the industry's first open protocol for sharing. And what that means is now you can actually share across organizations, across companies, but you don't need to have the same tech stack on both sides. You don't have to have Databricks on both ends to be able to share the data set. One company can have Databricks. The other side, you might just have Tableau, or you might just have Power BI, and you can access that data set and consume it securely. And that's really, really important. And I think it's great to see that so many other partners joined in on this. So we had data set providers like FactSet and NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange. They were part of it. We had Power BI, Tableau, the BI vendors. They want to join this as well. And then we have the exchanges where you can buy data sets, AWS Data Exchange and Azure Data Share. So those are important as well. And then, of course, lots of other startups like Starburst and Dremio and others also joined in on this. So all of the vendors that I mentioned can now actually share data sets between each other in an open way.
Mm. And when I talk to Snowflake about this, in particular, they say that the focus on just one format in the way that they do it actually was a choice to make where they now think they can innovate faster or innovate better by having a more narrow focus. They use the example. They made a recent shift that helped lower costs for all their customers by about 30%. Just by being able to narrow in and focus on that one format. I guess, what do you say to that? And do you think that this openness does take away some of the potential for innovation because you're more broadly focused?
I think it's the other way around. I think actually, and there's lots of evidence that openness actually leads to lots more innovation, right? Let me give you an example. Company like Databricks, like Starburst, like Dremio, all of these are built on this open format Parquet. If that open format didn't exist, our technology stacks probably would not exist. So slowly, there is this standard that's emerging in the data space of, Parquet is one, and then Delta was the technology that we developed, which is also open source, and so on. So this allows lots of other vendors to join in and innovate on top of that. With one proprietary format, if we had one, no other vendor could build on top of that because, why would they? So I think it's actually the other way around. You can actually innovate more. Maybe what they're thinking is that it's hard to modify an open standard. But actually, we've seen lots of modifications happen over the years to, for instance, Parquet or Delta. These are the technologies in the data space. There's been a lot of evolution over the last 3-4 years. So the space is evolving very, very fast. This is not some committees of standards, bodies that sit somewhere and, debate for years and years to come up with a standard. It's the open source community that's super fast innovating. And actually, you can see Snowflake even now is adding support for certain open source technologies. So I think they realize it as well.
Mm-hmm. And outside of the data sharing, you've announced last week. You announced a lot of other features, around ETL, data governance, AutoML, as you mentioned. What's the vision here? Is the goal to be, a one-stop shop for all things analytics, or I guess walk me through, what these series of announcements, how you think it progresses the company towards your ultimate vision?
Yeah, long term, you nailed it. People want multi-cloud, people want open, and we want to have a platform, a broad data platform that can support all the different use cases that you want to do on analytics. Okay, but be it real time, machine learning, future looking, backward looking, BI, data warehousing, virtualization, all of it, end to end, right? In the long run, that's the vision. And it should be in an open way, and it should be targeted to enterprises, and it should be multi-cloud. But the particular announcements that we made, each sort of advance us further towards that goal. We're still far to go. I think, this space is going to really look different in a decade, I think. This is the early innings of it. But we took a few crucial steps. So one thing we announced was a governance catalog. It's called Unity Catalog that lets you actually look at all your data sets and sort of set up security policies, audit them. And not only that, it does that across the clouds. So it's not in a particular one cloud. Second, you can plug in existing catalogs you have because there's lots of catalogs out there as well. So it works with all the other catalogs. It's called federated. And then third, the thing that's really important about the catalog is that they can store different types of data assets. Catalogs in the past typically just store data sets. This catalog can be any data asset. It could be a machine learning model that do predictions, and you can store it in there and govern it. So this governance is really important for enterprises, and that's top of mind for them. So that's one thing that moves us forward to enabling governance on the lakehouse. And of course, it has support for Delta sharing, which I just mentioned. So you can now actually share data sets between organizations that have Unity Catalog. The second thing that we announced were lots of performance improvements to our warehousing capabilities. So the data warehousing capabilities, has seen orders of magnitude improvements in performance just since last July. And we shared exactly sort of all the different performance characteristics. So that's an exciting move forward for sort of the warehousing capabilities that we announced November last year. And then third, AutoML, I think, is really critical. AutoML, I think, will change the industry over the next decade or so. What it enables you to do is basically get analysts who might not know advanced machine learning and help them actually do machine learning for them. So it's sort of applying AI to AI, automating away a lot of the tedious work that otherwise data scientists would have to do themselves, just automating that away for them. So that's really, really important for us, and we're excited about that as well.
One of the things that you announced last year was SQL analytics, and that's obviously Snowflake's kind of bread and butter territory. Why even bother making that move instead of, one might say, why not just double down on the area where you're most prime, which would be, the data scientists and the AI. So why even bother to go and unveil or work on something like the SQL analytics?
That's a great question, because actually internally it was debated heavily. Why not just focus on data and AI, right? Just AI portion. Why do we need to do the warehousing and the backwards looking stuff, right? Let's just focus on the future looking stuff. And I was of the same opinion as well for a long period. And that is actually our focus is the AI and the data science in the future looking. So how come we did it? The reason we did it is that about 2 years ago, we started analyzing, we're a data company. So we analyze, the data of how people are using our platform. And we saw that more and more people are actually plugging in BI tools, these business intelligence tools, to Databricks, asking questions about the past, which is the thing, we didn't have support for. We didn't have great security for it. We didn't have any capabilities for it, but we saw that it's growing pretty rapidly and people wanted to use us like that. And we started interviewing them and saying, why are you doing this? Like, why are you just not using a data warehouse for this? And they said, well, the problem is this. I have the vast majority of our organization's data in a data lake in the cloud. I also have a data warehouse, but what happens is I copy the data from the data lake into the data warehouse, and then I can get it into a dashboard I can put up on the wall that tells us what the revenue was last week. But the problem is the data in the data warehouse is outdated. So my dashboard, even though it comes up really fast, the numbers are 1 week old. I want those numbers to be fresh. And we said, okay, why don't you, they said, well, the data is sitting in the data lake. That's the most fresh data. If you can enable me to do BI directly on the data lake, I would pay a lot for that because I want to have fresh data. I want the dashboard to have the most recent statistics. So about 2 years ago, then we decided, look, the customers are sort of doing it themselves. Why don't we just improve it a little bit for them and put in a little bit of investments and see if that grows the usage? And, we were getting really great feedback. So we just continued investing. And then, about a year ago, it was pretty clear that this will have a lot of sort of growth if we continue investing in it. So we launched the product, and it's since then seen, also sort of exponential growth in usage. So it's really, the short answer is our customers basically pushed us in that direction. They did it with or without us. So we then decided, let's help them.
In a similar token, it seems like customers are pushing Snowflake to also be more, to be able to use their data warehouse as something to support AI. And they're talking about openness and integrations with the AI engine offered by some of the hyperscalers as the route to be able to do that. And the off-sided, being the Sweden of the industry and being neutral and allowing customers to kind of pick which engine that they might want to use. I guess when you look at the two approaches that you two are taking and moving closer together, what's your view on their ability to encroach into your territory? And do you think ultimately they'll be as successful?
Well, anyone can do anything, right? But I would say that it's very, very hard to do machine learning on a data warehouse. And Snowflake is a great data warehouse, and data warehouses were built for SQL and for BI, which is primarily statistics about the past, revenue of the past, sales in the past, dashboarding, those kind of things. It's really fundamentally not built for, AI forward-looking stuff. And, we actually tried, in my previous life as a researcher, tried to actually bolt on machine learning on top of data warehouses, and the project failed after 5 years. So it's just very hard to do. And the reason is it's built on this technology called SQL. And SQL is fundamentally basic statistics, what's called descriptive statistics. Tell me the statistic, the max, the min, the average, the median, and slice and dice it by this. Machine learning is advanced statistics. It's much more iterative. So it does many passes over the data, and it's just hard to do that with SQL. So I think that's going to be very, very hard. Many people have tried it, but it's very difficult. I really think you have to kind of then go to the lakehouse paradigm. And maybe they will do that. Maybe they'll try to sort of go to the lakehouse paradigm, but that would have to mean that they re-platform the whole thing and build it directly on a data lake, which is not currently how it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you talk about switching gears a little bit, when you talk about the future of building on AI, we've talked a lot about you guys courting startups and that being a big part of your business. If I'm a traditional SaaS company, say a Salesforce, a ServiceNow, or Workday, should I be worried about what the future is going to hold as companies like yourself and others get more success in convincing people to build on top of it?
No, it's the other way around. Actually, if you talk to any of those CEOs, and I talk to many of them, they will tell you, I absolutely want AI. Like, it's super important, right? If you take any of those that you mentioned, Salesforce, Adobe, and so on, intelligence is going to be super critical. They already talk about it, right? Salesforce talks about Einstein and, their efforts around that. So anything that, is touching data could be so much more intelligent. And everyone knows it. Mark Andreessen famously said, software is eating the world. That is, software is creeping into your watch, into your thermostat, into your Tesla car. Well, AI is going to eat all of software. Wherever you have software, that software can become more intelligent, use data, and automate things. And all the CEOs of companies that develop software know this. And we're here to help them. So they can leverage that and then build on top of it. So many of the companies you mentioned actually are leveraging Databricks under the hood to get more AI capabilities into their offering, into their software offering that the company that you mentioned.
Do you see any challenge, I guess, or see the opportunity more for the greenfield approach if a startup is just starting out now versus, again, software companies that have been around for a while, they're now trying to backtrack and infuse AI? What's the advantage if you're starting now, and how do you think that'll impact, again, some of the legacy players that, as I mentioned, are now trying to infuse AI back into their products?
Yeah, look, by the way, we have customers in both segments, right? Actually, I can share that the vast majority of our customers are startups, the kind of greenfield ones you refer to. The vast majority of our revenue are enterprises, large enterprises, right? And if you look at it, the realities are different. It is harder for enterprises. That's why we focus so much on the enterprises. The reason it's hard for them is that they already have data. It's siloed into different data warehouses. So you really have to enable them to unlock that and get it out of those data warehouses. New companies don't have that. They'll just pick the best stack for everything. So they'll just come in and say, okay, we're just going to use Databricks. We're only going to use cloud. We're going to use these latest technologies. They don't need to use these technologies. They're not going to make any choices like that. They're not going to have on-premise problems, all that kind of stuff. So that's one problem. Second, big, large enterprises have a lot of regulation and compliance needs. They have contracts with their customers. Those contracts might have been written 20 years ago. So you have to kind of really help them with the governance and with how to actually satisfy the security policies that they have. And then third, they have the people problem that you mentioned, right? How can they get access to the latest talent? But our mission is to help them. Those exact organizations, we want to help them. And we think they have a few things in their advantage. One is they have data that they've collected over a long period of time. Yes, maybe it's stuck in some old system, but they do have the data. The new startup doesn't have that data. Mm-hmm. Second, they have a relationship with customers over the past 30, 40, 50, maybe 100 years. That's really important as well. And they have know-how in their business. They just need the technology, which we provide. They need the people, and they need the processes to organize themselves so that they can actually leverage the data. I think a lot of them have proven that they can actually do that. So I don't think you're just going to see Silicon Valley startups replacing all the companies on the planet. And we're certainly here to help the existing enterprises.
Mm-hmm. We talked about Snowflake. One of the other elephants in the room that we didn't talk about were the hyperscalers, Google, AWS, Microsoft. There's others that also offer similar products to Databricks within their stack. A lot of companies are already going to be using these entities elsewhere. Why do you think they'll need to go to a third-party vendor like yourself instead of just using one of the products from those companies?
Yeah, keep in mind, when we started only in the cloud. We don't have anything on-premise. So from day one, every one of our customers was also a cloud customer of the cloud vendors. So people picked us from day one, even though they were already on the existing clouds. And I think it has to do with focus. I think it has to do with enterprises that build on top of the clouds can focus on that one problem. They can do it really, really well. So that's why people kept picking us. And initially, we were only on AWS. And really, AWS was the only cloud in town, say 2012, 13, right? Mm-hmm. But people still picked us because we were focused and we could delight our users with great experience. That was back then. Now what has happened is that now there's 3 or 4 cloud vendors and they're fiercely competitive. They keep reducing price. Changes happen. Their CEOs change. New people come in. They innovate. There's a lot of fast moves that are made. So now people want the optionality of picking multiple clouds. And also they're seeing that the big share of their wallet is going to the cloud vendors. So they like to manage that better. And buying more from those vendors doesn't necessarily help that. So this ecosystem on top of the cloud, the sky as I call it, emerges, and I think that's good for everybody. I think that if you align with the cloud vendors, you can still partner with them really well. They've been very supportive of us because they need also an ecosystem on top of them, and we bring a lot of revenue to them. So I think it's all good. But you're going to see more and more vendors like Databricks. Actually, it's not just going to be Databricks and Snowflake. There's going to be many others over the next decade.
Mm-hmm. And we're approaching the end of the 30 minutes. I guess just one last question for you. When you think about the future of your business, what's keeping you up at night the most right now?
It's just seizing the opportunity and executing. People love to think about competition and so on, but actually, if you look at any company that didn't do well, it's because they didn't execute. They had the whole world in front of them. They had the money, they had the cash, they had the employees. They just didn't seize the opportunity and they stopped innovating. So for us, it's just keep innovating, keep executing, make sure that you're doing everything right. Don't take on unnecessary risks with your employees or with security or these kind of things. Make sure you're dot the I's and cross the T's. So it's just execution is top of mind for us, and I say that to the company all the time. Just keep executing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time this morning. I'm sure you have a crazy second half of the year ahead of you, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again. But appreciate the time this morning, and thanks for everybody who tuned in.
Thanks, Joe.